I was standing at the end of my own driveway when the patrol car turned onto the street. Its lights were already flashing. Karen was blocking my truck, pointing at me like I was a criminal. Her husband was walking around my vehicle, taking pictures of my license plate. "This road belongs to the HOA," Karen shouted. "You don't get to park here. You don't even get to be here." An orange violation notice was zip-tied to my gate. The officer stepped out. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." Karen immediately jumped in. "He's trespassing. I want him removed." I didn't argue. I simply handed the officer my ID. Karen smiled. She thought she had already won. What she didn't know was that the officer was about to discover something that would completely change the situation. My name was on the ownership records for the road beneath his patrol car, and Karen had just called 911 on the man who legally owned the neighborhood. I had moved into Cedar Ridge Estates several months earlier. I kept a low profile. I drove an old work truck, wore work boots, and didn't talk much about my background. To the neighbors, I was just another homeowner. Karen was different. She had been HOA president for 6 years, and everyone knew it. She controlled the meetings. She controlled the fines. And, according to several neighbors, she controlled the neighborhood through intimidation. The first person who warned me was an elderly woman named Ruth. She had lived there for 11 years. "Get yourself a copy of the HOA covenant," she told me. "Why?" She lowered her voice. "Because Karen will eventually find something to fine you for." She was right. 6 weeks after I moved in, I received my first violation. My mailbox was apparently the wrong shade. The fine was only $11. I paid it, not because I believed Karen was right, because I wanted to see how far she was willing to go. I took a picture of the violation notice, recorded the date, and placed it in a folder. That folder would eventually become very important. The second violation was different. This time it was $600. The reason? My fence stain supposedly wasn't an approved earth tone. I checked the HOA rules. The color was actually allowed. But beneath the fine was something more concerning. A warning that failure to pay could result in a lien against my property. Karen later stopped me near the mailboxes. "You got my letter?" "Yes." "Good," she said. "You have 30 days. I asked her a simple question. "Who approved the $600 fine?" She smiled. "I chair the compliance committee. I don't need a board vote for enforcement decisions under $6,000. I knew that wasn't what the bylaws said, but I didn't argue. Instead, I asked another question. "Who owns the road?" Karen laughed. "The HOA does." She walked away smiling. I watched her disappear around the corner. Then I quietly added another page to my folder. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing something. Karen didn't enforce the rules equally. My neighbor had been fined $400 for an outdoor storage shed. Karen had the exact same type of shed in her own backyard. No violation notice. No fine. Nothing. I took a photograph. Then I started talking to other residents. One woman told me she had been fined over a tree. Another had received a violation for drainage. Another had been threatened with a lien. Everyone had a different story, but there was one thing they all had in common. Nobody wanted to challenge Karen. Then Ruth showed me her paperwork. She had been fined repeatedly over several years. The reasons kept changing. Fence, drainage, tree, something else. The fines had eventually grown to more than $11,000. And now there was a lien against her house. She looked exhausted. "I raised my kids in this house," she told me. That was when something changed inside me. I had originally been documenting Karen's behavior because I didn't like unfairness. Now I knew I had to do something, but I still didn't tell anyone who I really was, because there was something about the neighborhood that Karen didn't know. Something she had never bothered to investigate. Before buying my house, I had spent months reviewing property records in the area. The subdivision had an unusual ownership structure. The HOA didn't actually own several of the roads and common areas. They operated under an easement. The underlying land belonged to a holding company, and that holding company was connected to me. I had acquired the property interests years earlier. Karen didn't know. The residents didn't know. Even most of the HOA board didn't know. I hadn't hidden it illegally. I simply hadn't advertised it. And Karen had never bothered checking. That was her biggest mistake. She assumed authority was the same thing as ownership. It wasn't. Then one afternoon, I came home and saw 3 HOA maintenance trucks parked beside my property. 3 workers were dismantling my fence. I jumped out of my truck. Stop! One of them looked at his clipboard. Board order. Who authorized this? Encroachment on HOA-controlled land. I looked at the fence. It had been there for years. Then Karen arrived. She stood there with her arms crossed. You were notified, she said. No, I wasn't. She didn't answer. She simply watched as the workers continued taking my fence apart. I didn't lose my temper. I took photographs. I recorded the damage. And I added everything to my folder. 2 days later, Karen publicly discussed me at an HOA meeting. She called me an ongoing compliance problem. She claimed I was encroaching on HOA property. I sat quietly. I didn't defend myself, because I knew something Karen didn't. She was building a case against herself. Every violation, every threat, every false claim, every unauthorized action. I had documentation. Then came the morning everything exploded. I was standing beside my truck when Karen blocked my driveway. Her husband was photographing my license plate. She pointed at me. This road is HOA property. I looked at her. Karen, are you sure? Absolutely. Then she called 911. She told the dispatcher I was trespassing. She told the officer I was refusing to leave. She told everyone watching that I had been causing problems for months. The patrol car arrived. The officer asked for my ID. I handed it over. Karen stood nearby, smiling. The officer walked back toward his cruiser. He looked at my driver's license. Then he looked at his computer. Then back at the license. His expression changed. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy telling the neighbors how she was finally taking control. The officer spoke into his radio. Then he checked something again. A second patrol car arrived. Now Karen looked confused. The first officer walked toward her. Ma'am, can you step over here for a moment? She followed him confidently. Then I heard a few words. Parcel number. Recorded ownership. County records. Karen's expression changed. The officer returned. He looked at her. Then he looked at me. This road and the surrounding common area property are privately owned, he said. Karen frowned. What? The HOA has an easement. He paused. You don't own the land. Karen's face went completely blank. Then the officer looked at me. Sir, according to county records, you're the owner. The street went silent. Someone actually gasped. Karen stared at me. No, she shook her head. That can't be right. The officer calmly explained that the records were public. The HOA had never owned the underlying land. They had only been permitted to operate there under an easement. Karen had spent 6 years telling everyone she owned the roads. She didn't. And now the police officer had just told her in front of the entire neighborhood. I owned the ground beneath her feet. Karen looked at me. You knew. I nodded. Yes. You knew this whole time? Yes. Her voice became quieter. Then why didn't you tell me? I looked at the orange violation notice still hanging from my gate. Because you never asked. The street became completely silent. Then I opened my folder. I pulled out the $600 fence stain violation. You said you could issue fines under $6,000 without a board vote. I showed the document to the officer. That wasn't true. Then I showed the photograph of Karen's own storage shed. The same type of shed she'd fined another homeowner for. Then I mentioned Ruth. There's also an $11,000 lien against an elderly homeowner's house.